Hello everybody, today I'm going to be talking about The Way of Edan, Book 1 in the Edan Trilogy by Philip Chase. And before I get into this, I want to go ahead and say in full transparency that Philip Chase, the author, is a very dear friend of mine. I hold Dear Dr. Fantasy very dear to me. And I want to go ahead and mention that at the beginning because for one thing, he did give me the ebook to this, an arc of the ebook, but also because I feel knowing certain things about Philip Chase did affect my reading experience and the way I interpreted certain things in this story, which I'll get into. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to do my best to refer to the author as Chase, which will be very difficult for me to do, and I'm sorry if I slip up, but I will try to keep my thoughts spoiler-free. This is a beautifully written story which has elves in it, which is the coolest part probably, but it also explores themes very familiar to fantasy readers, including courage, hope, faith, and friendship, among other things, and this is about a holy war. So we have this high priest, Bleda, who is gathering forces. He's conspiring with the king of Torlund, and he's trying to conquer all the surrounding kingdoms and make them convert to the Way of Edan religion, a religion which prophesizes this awakening of an eternal kingdom. And this is not the only religion of these surrounding kingdoms. There's also these Andumaic gods. So it's like the old gods versus the new religion with the new god. And then meanwhile, in the southwest of this world, in the kingdom of Astrolad, an island, we have an heir and sorceress named Sequara. And Sequara is trying to get all the surrounding kingdoms to join forces to resist this invasion, this holy war invasion. And this is a very difficult task because many of these kingdoms have a long-standing history of war with one another. And so she has a huge journey ahead of her to try to get them to come together. And meanwhile, we have a character named Dayraven up in the Mark in the northwest of this world. And he's living a really peaceful life. He has a beautiful wife-to-be. He loves to read. He loves stories and lore. And he gets mixed into this whole entire Holy War conflict. So the magic of this world is fascinating. There is amazing elf magic in this world. And the elves are pretty dangerous. They are very deadly, which is why we don't see a lot of them probably. I could use more elves in the story, I won't lie. But I really enjoyed what he did with the elves, what Chase did with the elves. And I also really enjoyed the magic in general. So there's also, in addition to the elf magic, there's this magic which is called the gift. And the gift is something that is a little mysterious as to whether somebody inherits the gift or whether they come across it through chance, circumstance, that sort of thing. And I predict there will be some reveals about the gift in future books. But this gift allows somebody to have command over animals and certain types of creatures like trolls. And it seems like if you have the gift, one, you can sense when another person has it, so you have a certain presence that you can feel within one another if you have the gift, but also the gift requires a certain amount of meditative skill in order to wield it. So you have to have a discipline of mind, an equanimity of mind, and I think that that's where some Buddhist tones come into the story. Now, this particular world is very rich in history and lore, and it has song in it. There are definitely great details regarding language, and I know I've been asked several times about the prose and whether it's dense. I would say this is a very Tolkien-inspired fantasy. So in addition to elves and trolls, we also have dwarves or dwergs, but there is great attention to history, lore, and language, and song. And the prose is not dense at all. It feels like it has a simple elegance to it, and it flows beautifully. And you do get some wonderful traditional fantasy descriptions, such as inns and taverns and cobblestone roads and that kind of thing, meadows, rolling green hills. But I never felt as though the story got bogged down with description. It was enough to make you feel immersed in the world, and it was beautifully described. I really feel like this is going to be accessible to a number of readers, but you will see an occasional archaic word or Old Norse inspired word. However, there are some colorful language choices in the story I was not expecting, and there are some battle scenes where you do get your fair description of gore. And now I'm going to talk about some of the highlights. So I'm first going to talk about the themes before I get into the characters. So this story it approaches themes in an interesting way. And so I know I mentioned some at the beginning. Now, what was interesting is that some of these themes have a dual side to them. So, for example, courage. Courage is brought forth in this story as the medieval idea of we have a very limited time on earth, so let's make the best of it. Let's make the most of the time that we have and do the best we can. This is something that I learned from Chase. And at the same time, you see the flip side of courage, which is not the fear of death, but the fear of shame, and how the fear of shame can override the fear of death when it comes to battle and being a good warrior. And I know that's a conversation I've also heard Chase talk about as well. And I feel like that gets explored in this story. Same thing with loyalty. I feel like you see loyalty as a positive thing at times. Loyalty is something that you have with friends, something that you use to honor those you care about, that you're loyal to people you care about. But there's also a flip side of loyalty that's explored, where maybe loyalty is about doing something to feel safe and something you do out of fear. And maybe you're loyal because you lack imagination to try anything new or different than what you're given. So I liked how these themes were shown from different angles in the story. But my favorite theme that was explored in the story was empathy. And so this was interesting to me because I read a book about 10 years ago from the author Daniel Siegel called The Developing Mind. And in that book, Siegel talks about this part of the brain which operates when we are engaging in empathy, but it's a part of the brain which humans have some agency over. So you can technically shut off that part of your brain that engages in empathy. And he said this is absolutely important to do in certain situations, such as being a surgeon. The last thing you want is to feel empathy for the patient you're about to cut open, or you don't want to feel empathy if you're on the battlefield and about to kill somebody on the other side. But what happens when you can't shut that switch off? Now, Siegel says that for people who do have, the need to turn off that switch, it's imperative that they are able to turn it back on again at the end of the day, that's important for multiple processes in the body and well-being. But in this story, I feel like we really explore what happens if we can't shut that off. What happens if we are having empathy at a missed opportune time, so to speak. And I really enjoy the way that was explored. And again, I feel like that hints at transcendence and Buddhism in ways. And so those were parts that really spoke to me as a reader. Those were parts that I really loved in this particular story. I don't think I've ever read a fiction book that explored empathy the way that this story did. I thought it was so unique and so powerful. I felt as though I felt transcended with the characters experiencing this. So it was absolutely fascinating, and it felt like it really tied in so many of the things in the story. So I think it was so beautiful the way the themes of the story were integrated with the Holy War, with the magic, and also with the characters. And now to talk about the characters. So one highlight I can also point to was the way that female characters were written in this story. In particular, the character of Sequara, though I liked all the female characters in this story, Sequara was just a standout. I mean, she had this dignity and grace about herself, this poise. She was also able to see far ahead, so I think she had a strategic mind, but she also had a tender, loving quality to her as well. So she had a quiet strength and dignity, but she also knew when to assert herself, and I really enjoyed that about her character. There's also a crone character, and this crone character, Yurd, if I'm saying the name right, is very quirky and very powerful, but she also inspires a lot of love in the people close to her, and I really enjoyed that as well. I think that there's a lot to be said about inner beauty in this story, and that's brought through some of the characters, especially the female characters, in my opinion. And we have some fantastic villains in this story, especially the priests, Jaruman and Arna. I don't know if those are both villains. I think there's some moral grayness there, but the character of Jaruman, here's the thing. When I was reading this story, as I mentioned with a lot of the themes, I felt Chase's voice throughout this story. I felt like I was reading his story. I felt like knowing things about him came to my mind constantly as I was reading the story. But when I got to the chapter introducing Jaruman, I didn't feel that way at all. I felt as though Chase was channeling another voice coming through him, and it had so much nuance, so much conviction, and I loved it. And I also loved the character of Arna, which contrasted this character, Jaraman, very well. And another thought that came to my mind was how well Alan is going to narrate that voice. And I know Alan's excited about that as well. Now, as for the character of Dayraven, I have some mixed feelings here, and some of this could totally be a me thing reading against the text. So first of all, I will say that there were certain parts of Dayraven's character that were my favorite parts of the story, and there were certain parts of Dayraven's character where I just wanted to jump in the story and shake him up. Of course, I'm an elf and I'm very dangerous, so if I were in the story, I'd probably end up killing everybody, which wouldn't be a good thing, but if I could be a kind elf, I would want to jump in the story and shake him up, because he went through some very difficult things in this story, and I really wanted to see him process those things more. It seemed as though they didn't affect him to the extent I would have expected. There were some times where I felt he would experience a little bit of an ache, but then he would be distracted the next second by the journey ahead of him and the wonder yet to come. And I guess some of that's understandable. I had to keep reminding myself this is a young boy, this is a green boy, but I still wanted a little more from him. I do think that there could be some consideration in this story for him feeling a little indifferent for various reasons, but I still don't feel like that was quite the angle his character was written to be. And at the same time, there are certain people who are such givers in life that they don't really tend to their own inner challenges or their own inner emotions. So I just wanted a little more from that character, honestly, but overall, like I said, there were still parts in his story that were my favorite parts in the book. So it could be a me thing, and there is room in books 2 and 3 for me to feel very differently about this character. Another thing to mention is that there were a couple of confrontations in this story where I would have expected a little bit more tension and resistance, and I felt like they got resolved a little bit more quickly than I would have expected. No, I do understand that sometimes stories have to move along, but it still surprised me how quick some things got resolved. I think that some of that did build up at the end of the story. So at the end of the story, the way things ended made me very excited for where things are going to pick up in book 2. If you're somebody who loves traditional fantasy but want a slightly modern approach to it, you're going to enjoy this story. It has fantastic world building. It has elves and dwarves and trolls, and just some of the most fascinating magic and explorations on empathy. I really hope that you all enjoy this story if you pick it up. Please let me know in the comment section below if you will pick it up, and I really look forward to discussing it with you and with Chase in the future. So thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.